Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to talk about something else that one of my Patreon members has suggested that I do. So, in case you don't know about my Patreon page, when you join Patreon and you become a member of the Radiate tier, you will have the opportunity to tell me what you want me to do these YouTube videos on. So I want to do a shout out to Vivian Bryan, who suggested that I do a YouTube on Pope Francis. So that's what we're here to do today. Thank you, Vivian. And so let me scoot over. We're going to take a look at his chart because, and those of you that did see my world predictions for 2024, and by the way, you can still purchase those off my website, and you can become a Patreon member on my website. Go to galacticcenter.org. Now, let me just say that we looked at his chart in detail in that predictions, but now I'm going to look at it in detail with you guys to better understand what's ahead for Pope Francis. Let me scoot over here. We're going to put his chart up, and then I'm going to tell you what I see in this chart. So here is Pope Francis' chart, and he has, when you look at his ascendant, it is Gemini ascendant, and he has K2 in the first house. And that makes total sense. K2 is otherworldliness. It's spiritual. It's someone that's not looking into the material world. And it's also someone that pretty much wants to escape the world in some way. I believe a lot of people, through spirituality and religion, it is a way that they escape this world. But looking at his chart, he has Mercury, Jupiter, Sun, and Rahu all in the sign of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the sign of spirituality. It is the ninth sign, which is relative to the ninth house, which in Vedic astrology and astrology, the ninth house is the house of religion and spirituality. It actually is the house of beliefs and laws. So you can look at this as spiritual law, man-made law, whatever. The ninth house deals with laws. And it deals with justice, righteousness, the things that bring justice to the world. So religion is definitely a major part of that if you consider what is justice and, God's law, in other words. So looking at his chart, he has got so many planets in the seventh house. Now, the seventh house is the house that deals with partnerships. And more than anything, what I have found that when people have a vast array of planets in the seventh house, I mean, if you know anybody like this, mark my words, they get other people to do a lot of work for them. They're directors of others. They get people to do what they need them to do, and that's basically what a pope has to do. Now, what's interesting about his chart is he does have Saturn in the ninth house of laws and regulations and spirituality. So this can be someone that really is regimented to the law. And sometimes I find, though, people that have Saturn in the ninth house, they're kind of cynical to religions. But in this case, Saturn is in Aquarius. It's about humanity and abiding by the laws. Okay, so taking one more variable into account, the Pope has Moon in Capricorn in the nakshatra Shravana, and Shravana is the nakshatra that deals with the listener. Its symbol is the ear. So it's for someone who listens and hears. And definitely, he's probably listened to a lot of people in that confessional booth, hasn't he? But that's what it rules. And it also deals specifically with learning. That's a nakshatra of learning and books and studies. And it's a very serious nakshatra. It sits in Capricorn. The moon is very close to Venus. And in this chart, they both are situated together in the 8th house, which is a very deep and profound house that deals with deep, dark questioning, psychological analysis, but it also deals with things that are outside of this world. The 8th house deals with mediumship, psychics, intuition, death. It is a profoundly transformational house. So to have your moon there is not an easy place. You've gone through a lot in this lifetime, a lot of difficulty. And Venus there, well, you know, this goes in part where relationships, I mean, all relationships are tested with the moon and Venus here. But what I really wanted to get at, looking at his chart, is what this year is going to be like for him. Because remember, more than anything, Vedic astrology is known for its predictive tools. And one of them is called the dashas. So the dashas are a predictive tool that is based on where your natal moon is in a chart. So consider how important that means. Your natal moon in a birth chart determines when everything is to transpire throughout your life. That is huge. And that's why I always call Vedic astrology a lunar-based system, whereas Western astrology takes into account the seasons, the sun. It's a solar-based system. This is lunar-based. And if you'll look at the moon, whatever nakshatra it's in, the planet that rules that nakshatra, yes, there's 27 nakshatras, and a planet rules each nakshatra. That means that's the cycle you start your entire life out in when you're born. His moon sits in Shravana. Shravana is actually ruled by the moon. So have the moon in Shravana is almost like having the moon in its own sign of rulership. It makes it very powerful. But it also means he started his life cycle out in the moon cycle. Now, the Pope he's 87 years old this year, and by the time of December in 2024, he will be 88. He is way up there in years. And right now, starting according to his time of birth, starting around mid-October of 2023, he began his Venus Mahadasha. So he started Venus, but it's all based on where his moon is as to when he would receive the Dasha of Venus. Now, if you'll note in his chart, Venus sits in the 8th house. Now, the 8th house is, as I said, one of the most difficult houses in a chart. It's actually called the Dastana house in Vedic astrology. One of the worst, causes suffering. Okay? But it is the house of death. And anyone at this age that goes into a Mahadasha that's in the 8th house, it doesn't look good for what's coming. It just doesn't, you know. But I will give him this. The Venus Dasha is 20 years long. So no doubt the Pope will pass in his Venus cycle. He's not going to live to 120, right? So he's going to pass, or 110. He's going to pass in the Venus cycle. But he just started it. And when you first start a cycle, that's where everything starts to change in accordance to where that planet is. Remember, when you change into a dasha, we'll just call it the planetary cycles. Then you begin to look through the lens of that planet in a chart. What house it's in, what houses it rules, what other planets it's next to. And that's how you get an idea of what will be happening. Now, not only do we look at just those variables of the dashas, we look at the transits as well. So looking at Pope Francis, just moving into the Venus Dasha. We wonder, could this be detrimental in the way of his health? And one thing I will make reference to, as of last October 2023, he has been ill. He has not been strong or healthy. There's been a decline in his health in the last part of 2023. This could be on account of the Venus Mahadasha that he's in. Now, Venus sits close to the moon, and the moon rules the second house. And the second house in Vedic astrology, as well as the seventh house, are called Maraka houses. Maraka means deadly, or it means killer to be exact. And a lot of times when people go into Maraka dashas, they could pass. Now, of course, you will go through many dashas of Maraka planets, and you don't. It's just that when you finally do, many times it's a Maraka dasha. Now, for Jupiter, all the planets that are in his seventh house are considered Marakas, as well as the moon, because it rules the second house. So the moon being situated next to Venus influences that Venus dasha in a difficult way. I have to say that. And the other thing that's going on for the Pope is we want to start looking at where Rahu and Ketu are, because they are really the determinants of the biggest changes that are going on in a lifetime. Now, Rahu has just entered into the 10th house, and Ketu has entered into his 4th house, because Rahu and Ketu just shifted, Rahu into Pisces and Ketu into Virgo. But probably the most difficult thing that I see coming up here is that in January and February, Ketu is going to be on his Mars, okay? And actually, the very, right now as I speak, the end of December, we have Rahu at 28 degrees and Ketu at 28 degrees of Virgo. So it's within 2-degree range of his Mars right now, which his Mars rules his 6th house. Mars rules Scorpio and Mars rules Aries. The 6th house is the house of health, of work and health. Now his Mars, by the fact that it's in Virgo, Virgo is the sign of health and healing. And the fact that Ketu, which is the indicator of losses, is going to be crossing over his Mars in January and February could be a further decline for him, because Ketu is loss. And Ketu, wherever Ketu is in a chart, is going to be where there's sort of like this sense of not being whole or complete or loss, or being part of otherworldliness, not part of this world. And Ketu crossing over the planet that rules his health is not a good thing for January and February. So I want to say to the Pope, watch your health. Do everything, and I'm sure he is right now, because he hasn't been well, to watch his health. And maybe he needs a break. Maybe he needs to take a break from his work to take care of himself. But something needs to be done, because this is a very, very difficult aspect that I see happening. Now, as Jupiter will eventually go into the 12th house by May, the 12th house is a house of retirement, getting away, relaxing. So if he is strong enough to get to where, when Jupiter goes into Taurus, he will have to probably retire, to take a break, go, get away. And I don't know why we have so many people working such difficult jobs in their 80s anyway. Something needs to change, but right now that's the way it is, I guess. So something needs to change. And so another thing is as I'm speaking right now, going into January, Mars will be in Sagittarius. And Mars is going to cross over all of his planets. They're in Sagittarius, one right after another in January. And by February, Mars will be on his Venus and his moon, which February looks very difficult for the Pope. Very, very difficult. It's in the 8th house. This is the house that can deal with endings. So he's got to, and like I do, always tell everyone, yes, we can see very difficult time periods coming up. And yes, some people can pass, but they don't always pass during those times. Sometimes they can overcome it. I think it has to do with free will. But this is going to be a really hard time for Pope Francis as we have Mars crossing over all the planets in Sagittarius in January, beginning of February, and then February going over Venus and the moon. February and March, January through March is going to be monumentally hard for the Pope. And at his age, he needs to do something drastic. Yeah, something to really give him a break, because chances are physically, according to his chart, times will be tough for him. So I just want to leave it at that. So I just wanted you to see the Pope's chart and how the dashas, how the transits work as they go through different houses and activate the different planets. You can see what's going on. And especially when you have the Mahadasha ruling planet, which is Venus, being aspected by the transits, it is doubly difficult. And what we have is Mars by February going over Venus, and it's going to be doubly difficult because that's his dasha ruling planet Venus. So with that, Vivian, thank you for bringing his chart to our attention. Hopefully he can get the rest that's needed, and hopefully he can overcome this great difficulty, but it's going to be tough. But thank you, Vivian Bryan, for suggesting this. Remember, if you become part of my Patreon page, you can help me decide what videos I'm going to be doing for my YouTube. And remember, I'm in direct conversation with everyone in Patreon. And remember, if you want to learn Vedic astrology, my university is starting a new semester, the beginning of the year. Get ready. Go to universityofvedicastrology.com, become one of my students and a member of our community. Become a Vedic astrologer. I'm here to support you with that, and I will be working with you. So with that, I think I'll close. Thank you.